Greetings, folks. It's been a little while. I've been immersed in a lot of literature as of lately, and had mixed feelings about sharing this information. One, I feel that people that aren't doing their own studies could get in trouble with this information, and I want to err on the side of caution before I share this with you. I really want you to evaluate this for yourself and study. Doing things like this may warrant a visit from men in black suits wanting to know what exactly you know and if you know, in fact, what you're doing. So I'm not advising anybody to run out and go do this, but I'm going to put out a pretty fair amount of information that I've acquired throughout the years that leads me to see the value in this information. I don't advocate that tomorrow you run out there because, well, Derek did a Facebook Live and his information seems pretty accurate and I'm going to do it because, well, Derek says so. Do not do that. Do not make that mistake. If you don't understand this information, do not fucking use this information. All right? So, here goes. What is the purpose of this white paper? In its simplest form, it is to address the questions that is asked by almost every so-called freeman and inmate who has ever been railroaded by a totally corrupted so-called judicial system. For the individual who knows they have actually committed a crime against their fellow man, the outrage of being incarcerated is severely subdued by self-admission of guilt and expectation of punishment if caught. So it is the truly outraged individual railroaded by the system who will be the most motivated to make the concerted effort to understand the information presented here and to pursue its remedy. All right? Remedy happens in the commercial side. Relief is an equitable term. You're looking for relief and equity. Remedy is on the legal side. What is the system? Without a fundamental understanding of what the system actually is and some understanding of how it got this way, there is virtually no possibility of understanding and implementing a remedy. The subject of what the system is, as opposed to what the system appears to be, could easily encompass a 1,000-page book. The history book explaining the events of the past that led up to the present state of the system could easily fill up to several thousand pages. And even if such books were in your possession, would you make the effort to digest the information? And even more important, how could you know it was the truth? Or was it just a bunch of half-baked theories that fall apart upon the serious examination by objective analysts? Obviously, this extremely brief paper will make no attempt to prove anything stated within regarding the system, will of necessity be simply asserted as fact, firmly established as irrefutable, yet facts that will probably contradict everything you thought you understood about the system. You will either face up to the fact that you have been deceived and lied to all of your life about almost everything you think you know about global financial prisons that the entire world is now part of, also referred to as the system. For those of you, the vast majority of humanity, who believe that such an evil global system of grand deception and enslavement cannot possibly exist, the mere suggestion of it sounding like the utterance of those conspiracy nuts and usually dismissed as kooks I suggest you immediately cease reading any further, since I have no intention of communicating with the hopelessly brain-dead masses on these matters. It goes against my nature to be simply making assertions that are not backed up with rigorous proof, but I am of necessity going to have to just move forward and assert the facts as irrefutable truth. If you demand the truth in life without compromise, you will eventually come to the same truth about the system. And what do I mean by the system? The system consists of all the institutions that man has created to organize, control, sustain itself out of necessity, the right to survive. Okay? In particular, government, religion, and commerce. There are no sharp demarcations between these three institutional entities, and in fact, are so hopelessly intertwined that I will refer to them as the system. See the first Matrix, the movie, again and again and again. The foundational facts to understand. 1. The system in today's world on a global widespread basis is now completely dominated, controlled by the forces of darkness, i.e. Satan, Lucifer, devil. This is not some mystical, superstitious raving. The dark forces are absolutely for real, are extremely mystical, are extremely ingenious in the science of controlling the people's thinking, and control all governments of men, and control the vast, overwhelming majority of all religions, and in particular, all of those so-called Christendom, not true Christianity, represented by the harlot upon the beast in Revelation scriptures. And for our analysts, the most important realization is that the financial economic system, in particular banking, the principal control level point of the commerce game, and the resulting enslavement of all of mankind, there is ample, if not massive, confirmation that one indeed seems to be now well approaching the final battle of righteousness over Satan, pure evil. Fact number 2. Probably as much as a little over 80% of the American people still believe that man's problems can be solved by political action, voting, having an informed opinion on political matters. They accept what they hear on the media and believe that authority can be trusted. Less than 10% of this group will ever realize how profoundly deceived they have been. Fact number 3. The world and all its resources, its most important being, the human slave resource, are in fact controlled by extremely wealthy and powerful families whose ingenious extortion strategies has become the foundation of the world's economy, global economy, economy slavery. Through the creation of fictional indebtedness by imposition of centralized banking to ultimately deprive the people of all property and freedom. Fact number 4. Secret societies such as the Illuminati, Luciferian, Freemasons, 33 level and above, and others are keepers of arcane knowledge, ancient knowledge, that guarantees the keeping of ordinary people in political, economic, and spiritual bondage. Major breakthroughs in the science, such as physics, medicine, engineering, etc., have long been consistently suppressed by these groups for purposes of maintaining plunder and control of the unthinking masses. Number 5. The original de jure Republican form of government given to us by our founding fathers, referred to as the United States of America, has been replaced by stealth and deception with a private, foreign-owned, and operated for-profit, actually plunder de facto corporate democracy, not a republican, in actuality a municipal corporation of the District of Columbia of the United States being incorporated in England, our former enemy in 1878. Now, when I decided to bring this literature forward to you guys, I've already read through it once, and I was sent a video earlier, and I put the link above this video. So it's important for you, if you stick around long enough to enjoy this, to go above and watch the video above this after. Follow the link. Fact number 6. The state of Ohio, or any state of Nebraska, Texas, Idaho, it doesn't matter, refer not to the legitimate de jure republic, a party to the Constitution for the United States of America, but are an unincorporated, no physical boundaries defined in their Constitution, municipal corporate instrumentality of the United States, fraudulently established under the Buck Act of 1940. These de facto government impersonators have no actual lawful authority over any inhabitants of the several states of the Union, being ultra-virus and null-teal to the corporate charter. They are the purest form of total fraud and deception against the people. Fact number 7. All the state courts found within the state of Ohio, or any state of, being brought into existence under the fraudulent authority of the state of, have never had any lawful authority over the inhabitants, only over the fictions they create and the trustees of those fictions, never the sovereign unless tricked into becoming a co-trustee. Fact number 8. In order to overcome the total lack of lawful authority over inhabitants in their bogus courts, a fictional constructive trust, your name spelled in all capitalized letters, in fact, another federal instrumentality, is created under fraud to deceive the inhabitants into believing he is the subject to the private copyrighted statutory whims of the de facto corporate government impersonator. Fact number 9. All so-called judges, who in fact are in the business of enforcing private copyrighted statutes and codes, are judicial officers, but rather mere executive administrators of a private for-profit plunder municipal corporation having absolutely no legal lawful authority over the sovereign inhabitants. Fact number 10. The United States and its instrumentalities, such as the state of, whatever state that you currently think you're in, created constructive trust named after inhabitants of the land, name spelled in all capital letters, in order to deceive the lawful inhabitants of his true identity and substantive rights, and fraudulently make the inhabitants liable for the debts and obligations of the United States and or its instrumentalities. Fact number 11, the United States and its instrumentalities, such as the state of, confusion, never recognized lawful inhabitants of the land and only recognized the fictitious creations of the United States and its other instrumentalities. Fact number 12. The United States District Court, as constituted in the several states, a party to the Constitution, are completely outlaw, illegitimate, constitutionally unauthorized private courts, impersonating a true Article 3 court, referred to as District Court of the United States, which no longer exists anywhere and cannot be elicited into existence by any known means. Fact number 13. The so-called Supreme Court of the United States is currently not functioning as an Article 3 constitutionally authorized court, but rather only as a high admiralty court. They consistently assert no comment when confronted with the simple question, are you the one Supreme Court described in Article 3 of the Constitution for the United States of America? Do you wonder why? Fact number 14. The corporate de facto democracy, not the de jure Republican United States of America, went into bankruptcy in 1933, creating a legal vacuum, the void of which was filled by fictional construct of fraud that led to the judicial system becoming the most corrupt legal system in the world without peer. An identified recent candidate for nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States, Edith Jones, appellate judge, publicly stated the American legal system is corrupt almost beyond recognition. Fact number 15. Also called crimes are in fact strictly a commercial matter, as stated in 27 CFR 7211, Code of Federal Regulations. Fact number 16. Ever since June 5th, 1933, because of the bankruptcy of the United States, when House Joint Resolution 192 was unanimously passed and became public policy per Public Law 7310, all products of the industrial economic system are of legal lawful necessity prepaid, i.e., everything must be paid for by the government to preclude the charges of high treason against Congress, Secretary of the Treasury, Board of Governors of Federal Reserve Bank, and the Comptroller of the Currency. This is an historical, irrefutable fact that has been kept secret from you for over 93 years. It's time to wake up. Now, these particular assertions being stated as facts, the following conclusions can be readily arrived at. 1. Pursuing any remedy within the so-called courts is a proverbial barking up the wrong tree, since the so-called courts have an immense financial incentive, as much as $10,000 a day per inmate, to convict any and everyone, innocent or guilty, is totally fucking irrelevant. The pretend court only take in the big bucks upon securing convictions at all cost, or as a compromise, obtain lucrative bribes from its victims. When I tell you that 98% of court cases that are brought by a prosecuting attorney, the state prevails in, okay? I think that should tell you what the court system is. It's a human trafficking ring, all right? That's what it is. So when I say that 98% of the time the state wins the cases, that means all the defense attorneys out there, all of them, out of all the defense attorneys, there's only 2% that ever fucking prevail. 2% out of all the defense attorneys. Do you know how piss poor defense attorneys must be? Why the fuck would you hire an attorney knowing that 98% of the cases that ever get run through a fucking state court are guaranteed fucking convictions? Now do you see why I have a problem with fucking lawyers that want to act like they know shit and they big badass motherfuckers? 98% of the time the state brings allegations against you, your entity, they fucking prevail. There ain't a defense attorney out there worth a sack of shit as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how any of them get fucking hired at $10,000 fucking retainers when the state wins 98 fucking % of the time. You don't think they're involved? You don't think this is RICO, baby? You don't think this is organized motherfucking crime? Hold up. I got some more information for you. There exists virtually no men, women of integrity left anywhere in the so-called judicial system because potential whistleblowers are not tolerated. The exceptions are indeed far and few between, and those remaining few are virtually powerless to help. All right? Whistleblowers are highly frowned upon. They get Epsteined and they get Clintoned, all right? That's the standing joke for the 21st fucking century. You get Epsteined and you can get Clintoned. You pick your poison. You can hang from a fucking doorknob, from a tie, which is their classic MO, right? Let's just be fucking real. These are criminals and they're dangerous. These people should be fucking euthanized. I'll go on. Hi FBI, hi CIA. Yeah. Follow all fucking day long. I hope you're taking notes. Start doing your fucking job. Let's go on. Much as the Chicago mobster Al Capone was virtually untouchable against the direct activities he engaged in, he was vulnerable indirectly through issues of taxation. Oh yeah. We're going to touch them where they don't like to be touched. Ooh, that feels funny. Don't do that. I'm going to show you. We're going to touch them where they don't like to be touched. But again, do your own fucking research before you do anything I'm about to speak of. I don't want to hear that you thought you knew what you were doing and you give me a phone call going, what do I do now? I'm in trouble. Because I am warning you. You will be tested about this information if you try to do this stuff. And there are people that have been put in prison for 30 years because they didn't know how to stand on their square. And they entered into a plea agreement and a deal. And then they got cast into a hole because they entered into a contract not understanding what they were doing. Number 4. The courts consisting of a clerk of the court, prosecutor, deputy prosecutor, pretend judge, and defense attorney are all profoundly vulnerable to the issues of tax delinquency against their person for the bonds, bills, true bill, being generated off the credit of its accused victims as products of statutes. A product of a statute is nothing different than, let us say, a product of an individual factory that builds automobiles. All right? All these products are indeed prepaid. Yet the people in their profound ignorance are expected to somehow pay for these things, even though after the U.S. bankruptcy, the people no longer could pay their debt at law since it was now legally impossible. No precious metals back the currency anymore after the confiscation of the gold by executive order. We forgot who the real sovereigns are. It is precisely this inability of the people to pay at law their debts that empowers them under Public Law 7310 to be able to exercise their exempt from paying, to achieve set-off, mutual cancellation of debt, for and all debts that the sovereign accepts. That is so important that I'm going to say it again. We forget who the real sovereigns are. It is precisely this inability of the people to pay at law their debts that empowers them under Public Law 7310 to be able to exercise their exempt from paying, to achieve set-off, mutual cancellation of debt, for and all debts that the sovereign accepts. Who carries the primary active degree of fault to make sure all debts are paid? Go read Title 18, subsection 8. Who is the CEO of that corporation? What is the office that's responsible for making sure that all those debts are paid, even though the CEO changes possibly every 4 to 8 years? What office does it attach to? Is it the office of the President of the United States that carries that primary active degree of fault to make sure all fucking debts are paid? Ooh. Think about that. Was it the office of the President of the United States that removed the gold in 1933? Who carries the primary active degree of fault? Is there not a maxim out there that says that he who provides the ends provides the means? I'll just plant that in your seed bank so you can think about it. We are all sovereign pursuant to the unanimous Declaration of Independence of the July 4, 1776. Now, wait a minute. You was sovereign way fucking before that. All right? Way before that. Because you were known by the Heavenly Father long before you even existed on this land. And if you read Scripture, you understand that. You were here by a higher authority and by a higher power, making us subject to no other man. Only God, the absolute sovereign, all men are created equal. Now, do you remember? We, being the sovereign, are the only source or commercial energy. So all funds that exist within the economy ultimately belong to a sovereign inhabitant on the land. The government has the capacity to generate any positive No government has the capacity to generate any positive commercial energy, only to generate destruction, death, debt, and a pure parasitical existence upon the productive energy of the sovereign. These concepts are not some pick in the sky mental exercise, but are the hard reality that the dark forces fully recognize and go to such lengths to keep hidden from us. With great ingenuity and cunning, the dark forces have attempted to totally neutralize these impediments to achieve total enslavement of the sovereign by making them think they are subject to their servants, the greatest of all con jobs in the history of man. Is there anything we can do about it? So how do we turn the table on the greed, total corruption, and infinite evil and control of this wicked system, to assert our sovereignty, to restore the de jure republic where everyone is a sovereign with no subjects, and put a stop to the domestic terrorism, rape, robbery, and pillaging being committed against the sovereign? Should we just wait for the promised divine destruction of the entire global system as guaranteed to happen eventually in Scripture that admittedly has 1,000% batting average so far? Or if we have the knowledge to do so, to put into action that can free the unjustly incarcerated and help set up circumstances that can severely curtail, if not cause to implode upon itself by its own accord, the criminal enterprise impersonating a judicial system. Since the criminal enterprise impersonating the judicial system is protected, supported, and mutually profiting from the plunder they generate, all the way to the Supreme Court of both state and federal venues, they actually are in the same one federal system, since the state is a mere federal instrumentality. Then we must seek remedy outside of the state and federal so-called government de facto that has a superior position. The United States, under its federal instrumentalities, such as the state of whatever, all went bankrupt in 1933 and went into receivership. The creditor in the bankruptcy is the International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, which uses their collection enforcement branch called the Internal Revenue Service to service payments into the phony bankruptcy that is being used as a subterfuge to extort money from the people through the income tax scam. The federal tax form provided a tool for remedy. The federal tax form always suggests the use for extortion of funds from individuals is the form 1040. Now, before we go any further, I'm questioning whether I should even make this video at this point, because I can just see people getting themselves into trouble. I really can. I cannot stress to you enough how important, before you do any of this, for you to do your research, all right? And remember that you're doing everything in good faith, with good conscience, and for good reason, and you're expressing that in written form on an allonge with anything you're fucking doing, okay? The federal tax form always suggests the use for extortion of funds from individuals is the Form 1040, OMB number 1545-0074. Even though upon examination of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, congressionally mandated listings of what this form is to be used for shows absolutely no applicability to the subject of individual income tax. It is totally purposeless to protest any aspect of the surrealistic income tax scam. The form totally supports your tax position you would be asserting, An example, Federal Tax Form 1040 filed for John Q. Doe, all capital letters, designated as legal fiction trust entity fiction, is provided. Noticing that the perjury statement states that you have examined the return and accompanying schedules and statements you make, and to the best of your knowledge and belief, it is true, correct, and complete. This will work in your favor, as we shall see, as you shall soon see, would protect you. I call your attention to line 21. Its attachment, which contains a statement that certain issue were being held by recipients. The eligible issue or issues are the listed items. In the example, the appearance bond for case number CR 55555 was listed. Since this bond was issued, your identity as the commercial entity backing the bond, even though the appearance bond may have only been posted at arraignment and never actually exercised. This changes nothing in the nature of the bond itself. What is necessary to understand is that the bond is issued, posted, and obtained its value, commercial energy, from the credit commercial energy of the actual living soul, the principal creditor that is being involved, compelled to appear. One may think the appearance bond is worthless document if not exercised to obtain release until trial, but in fact, it is a commercial instrument having commercial value. Remember, all crimes are commercial, equal to the assigned amount. The prison penal bonds. In fact, there also exist other bonds issued in a case which are so-called penal bonds, consisting of a series of 3 or 6 bonds, all having OMB numbers 9000/45. It is these bonds, not shown in the example, which are all created behind your back without your knowledge or permission, yet receive their commercial energy from the living soul, you. It is our understanding that these bonds are valued at $2 million per count, where the counts is the number of counts in the true bill indictment and or the counts of conviction. The first 3 bonds are the bid bond, SF-24, the performance bond, SF-25, and the payment bond, SF-25A. The next 3 bonds, which the same OMB number is 9000/45, are the Miller Act bonds. These typically are used in the federal court system. So it's SF-273, SF-274, and SF-275. Which may or may not apply to state cases as opposed to federal cases. Each bond issued would constitute a so-called roll, so the total sum of all these penal bonds could be 3 or 6 times $2 million times the number of counts, okay? All these bonds are 1099 OID eligible issues. All these bonds are 1099 OID eligible issues, okay? These are all tax issues. If you were to also list these as 1099 OID eligible issues, the amount becomes quite large. And the number of showing upon line 21 and 64 of the Federal Tax Return 1040 would be considerably larger. For simplicity of example, they are not included. Only the appearance bond, but can most certainly be included also. The description of these bonds would be all OMB numbers 9000/45 bonds for case number CR 55555, state of whatever, New York, Arizona, whatever, versus John Q. Doe. In addition to these case-related bonds, one can also include such eligible issues as traffic tickets, commercial bills of any sort, tax bills, court judgments, in fact, any and all commercial presentments, whether issued to you or by you, Remember, all the products of the economic system are prepaid by virtue of public policy and public law 7310, arising out of necessity of their no longer existing constitutionally authorized money to pay at law with. Once they took away our gold and silver backing, the backing of the currency that is mandated by our organic constitution in Article 1, Section 10, making it impossible to pay at law for anything, the party, government, that seized the gold under public policy pay the bills for us. It is our very inability to pay at law as a result of the executive order seizing the gold in 1933 that gives us the authority to demand that the items be treated as prepaid. As hard as this might be to accept because of your brainwashing by the global economy prison you have lived in your entire life, public policy mandate by 7310 House Joint Resolution 192 is an irrefutable fact of life, and many thousands of people have known of this reality all along but kept the truth from you. The 1099 OID taxes the eligible issue back to source. The 1099 OID taxes the eligible issue back to the source. All these eligible issues can be indeed processed via a 1099 OID filing. In order to tax the issue back to the source, ultimately in order to tax the issue back to the source, ultimately all credit returns to its source. Okay? Every corporate entity is bankrupt. They're insolvent. They don't have anything. Where are they getting their credit from? You. You are the source of energy that they feed upon. Okay? And they owe you a performance, a duty. But if you never study, if you don't apply yourself, just fall back in line. Go back, swing a hammer, stay the course of being a U.S. citizen. God knows I love U.S. citizens. I fucking love them. They're what make the world go round. That's a fact. They do. Swing a hammer, a pitchfork, be a U.S. citizen all day long. But for those of you that are interested, you really have to understand this to stand upon it and learn how to write documents in your own word, not templates. Okay? Make your own documents and pay attention to who you're going to send these documents to. For settlement and closing of escrow in exchange without money. How are we paying taxes without money? If the whole economic system is based upon promise sometime in the future, how do you pay? If there is no gold, and the only thing you have is Federal Reserve notes, or so you think the only thing you have is Federal Reserve notes, how do you pay? For settlement and closing of escrow in exchange with money, Treasury Direct Social Security, the 1099 OID essentially allows the issuing party to volunteer. Taxes are volunteer. If you're going to come in as surety as a creditor to bail these fuckers out for their taxes, you're entitled to the lump sum on the back end. And not only that, not only are you entitled to the annuities and the futures and the dividends and the derivatives and all that good jazz because you came in as the hero and paid them taxes. Okay? Your credit is also returned to you, but not in the form of Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes and revenue are two different things. Tax credits and Federal Reserve notes are not the same thing. I can't tell you how many people get a hold of me saying, man, I can't wait. I'm gonna make me videos with this pocket full of FRN notes and wave them around. We'll show everybody. It ain't about FRN notes. If that is the mindset you have, if you think that paper and ink in your pocket is going to somehow substantiate who you are as a living, sentient individual, this is never going to work for you. Ain't going to work. Ain't going to work. Ain't going to work. I just explained to you guys, everything is paid for. It's paid for. So what do you need a pocket full of paper in your pocket for? You don't. The pocket full of paper is a liability. It's a debt instrument that comes with a liability known as taxation. There's a difference between revenue and Federal Reserve notes. The 1099 OID essentially allows the issuing party to volunteer the issue or issues to be taxed. These issues were previously, in fact, delinquent, deferred taxes that had the appearance of being abandoned property, in that you never made any claim upon them. Upon identifying the eligible issues, we forced these funds to be set aside in essentially a demand deposit account or a disputed ownership fund, okay, as a federal withholding for recovery as a refund on the Form 1040 at line 64. The 1040 establishes the title to the eligible issue or issues. Okay? The issues are going to be the true bill due and owing, which has a tax attached to it. And the tax has not been paid yet because they've accessed your estate, and then instead of paying the taxes, they whisk it away and put it in a mutual fund. All right? But here's the kicker. If you willfully go in and volunteer to pay the taxes, if you willfully volunteer to pay them taxes, and you ain't even paying the taxes because that would make you a debtor, because the one that's liable for the taxes is the debtor. How do we affirm that? How do we know that? So you can't, it's not just well enough to know this information. You have to know how to speak too. Because if you think you're paying the taxes, I got news for you. That would make you a debtor. Because the only ones that are liable to pay taxes are debtors. And the creditors merely volunteer their credits to these insolvent delinquent debtors so they can pay them taxes. So you can get back your securities, futures, annuities, dividends, derivatives. So you're the creditor. You've already funded everything. You gave them a signature on a promissory note. You're the creditor. All credit must return to its source. People have this misconception that it comes back in Federal Reserve notes. It's a wrong idea. You want to find your way to the private side, you got to leave the Federal Reserve world behind as far as FRN notes. They're instruments of debt. They carry great liability. And because you use them, you end up being a debtor. But if you're using revenue, you're not a debtor anymore. You're the creditor. Okay? The 1099 OID proves you're the creditor. Now, if you're paying attention, I am not telling you to fill out the 1099 OID because you don't know how to fill it out. It's not your obligation. It's theirs. It's their obligation to fill out the 1099 OID. So for all the fucking gurus out there getting ready to lead you to prison in 3 to 5 fucking years telling you, oh, just randomly throw some numbers on the fucker and let it ride. Don't do that. They're not licensed by the licensor as a licensee to even fucking touch that paperwork. You can order them, and that's all good and gravy. There's a reason that you order them, because you're going to put these people on notice. You can give them an opportunity to fill out a 1099 OID, and you can even notify the IRS and tax court and let them know. I even took the liberty of ordering the motherfucking form for them, and they still didn't fill it out. They're evading taxes. They carry a tax liability, and I'm going to tell you right now what'll shake a judge and a prosecutor to their ever-living fucking core is becoming the corpus that sits in fucking jail. The corpse that sits in jail. Corpus delicti, the body of the crime, the corpse. Their corpse gets replaced for yours. You're no longer the surety because you volunteered to take care of them taxes. That's what that 1099 OID is. That's why you're compelling them to bring it forward with a full accounting. How deep in are you, JW? Oh, not for me. Cool. The 1040 for form simply identifies the 1099 OID eligible issues as both being an income to you, line 21, and as a federal withholding, line 64. The commercial instrument presentment only obtain commercial energy value from you. So you are the source, the principal creditor. However, since you never received actual spendable funds, when they bill you, they failed to enclose a check to pay with, a dishonor in fact. The amount in question is all in a withholding status at the time of filing the 1040. The 1040, the 1099 OID filed earlier affected the federal withholding on the funds that were being privately withheld. In reality, a delinquent deferred tax contraband kept hidden from you unless you learn of its existence and tax it back. It's talking about zeroing out the account. Remember, all banking business, at the end of the day, the accounts must read zero. A few other line items on the 1040 need to be clarified. Since I have nothing to gain by claiming any exemption, actually, only a partial exemption at that, I simply do not bother and put down zero. It really does not matter. Also, on line 40, I take no deductions because they are irrelevant to me. Now comes the more interesting part on line 44, the tax. Notice that the line says, see page 37. Does that parenthetically enclosed phrase infer any legal duty you are swearing under the penalty of perjury to have performed? Any items enclosed in parentheses or brackets are strictly considered removed from the document in the legal sense, but not always strictly adhered to. However, in an ever more fundamental sense, nothing on this page 37 is in any way legally incorporated as being a part of the 1040 from which you are attesting to only. Line 44 is somewhat cleverly constructed to trick you into self-assessing yourself some non-zero amount. As any serious student of income tax law has had drilled into his head, the individual income tax is voluntary, contrary to everything you have ever been led to believe. Only the taxpayer can assess himself. The IRS has absolutely no legal authority to assess the tax, even though they will try to bluff you. The form, line 44, does not in any way preclude you from entering a zero, even if they attempt to force you to assess a non-zero amount. You could simply 1099 OID that amount and tax that back to the source also. They cannot win on that issue. Filing the 1099 OID, the example shows a 1099 OID and the accompanying 1096 that must go with it. Now you can file 1099 OIDs online now, and it doesn't need the 1096. However, the forms are best handwritten, or the way that I'm doing it, is getting the paper form. All right. And I'm not filling it out. Again, I don't think anybody should fill out a 1099 OID. You just ain't qualified. You're not licensed by the licensors or licensee to do it. You don't have the account numbers. You don't have the accounting. You don't have full financial disclosure. How in the fuck could you fill out a 1099 OID? You fucking can't. Because you don't understand derivatives. You don't understand the accrual rating. You don't understand any of the terminology or technology that they're using to make the assessment for the 1099 OID. However, you have agents that work for you that do know how to do all that, and you can compel their performance or they're in breach of trust. Okay, and you have grounds for a suit for damages, harm, and loss caused to you and cheating the United States Treasury. All right. The two sample enclosed letters show the correspondence sent to the prosecutor asking him to please file the 1099 OID. It is also recommended that the clerk of the court and all assistant prosecutors in your case, the judge, also be added to the parties contacted. Since the people contacted, all will refuse to file the 1099 OID usually, even though it is required of them. They will all be in dishonor and become, as such, eligible to appear in the report as a recipient of the payer. The head prosecutor, as far as we are concerned, was the payer, who is actually was paid from your account without your knowledge or consent, which translates to stealing your exemption. So in a sense, you yourself were the hidden payer, the prosecutor acting as your agent without your knowledge. Normally, the filer of the Form 1099 is the same party as the payer, but the fraud caused you to have to be the filer out of necessity. Every party who dishonored your first letter has become holder due course of the federal liability, and hence should be listed in the recipient box by listing by stating holder in due course. Date of dishonor is the date of first letter. There can be multiple recipients to the same eligible issue. In a sense, these dishonored parties share the liability or liabilities individually and severally, consistent with the UCC holder in due course protocol. In those cases, you issue as the payer an International Bill of Exchange, IBO, or IBOE, or an International Promissory Note, IPN, the preferred instrument to use in conformance to the UNCITRAL Convention on International Bills of Exchange and International Promissory Notes to say a court of court for a fine or court cost, some typos in here, court cost, the recipient would be the clerk of court and the payer is you, instead of the agent of you, a so-called public servant. Any and everything issued that receives its commercial value from you via your exemption has as its source you. In other words, what is being articulated here is under Title 26, 2603, 2602, 2001, 2002, anybody in constructive possession of decedent state property is liable for the transfer taxes on the carryover basis and carries a primary active degree of fault and liability to ensure that they're being paid. If they refuse to pay it because they refuse to produce a 1099 OID to factor in the accrual rates of the securities that were generated and warehoused in a mutual fund for the next 30 to 45 years, it'll be pumping out dividends and derivatives and futures, okay, annuities. They're engaged in tax evasion, all right? Simply put, it's called tax evasion. And we know if Al Capone didn't get away with it, ain't nobody getting away with it, all right? It's the only thing. Now, the IRS, a lot of people have this misconception that the IRS is part of the United States. The IRS is a completely separate entity from the United States. And they are charged with the duty of balancing the books, and we are supposed to be helping them zero balance these accounts. And it's not that you do it for free, it just don't come back to you the way that you think it does. You got this misconception of money being paper. Many of you have probably heard of electronic fund transfers, but you really don't comprehend what an electronic transfer is. Okay? An electronic fund transfer is a non-taxable event because it's not U.S. dollars that are being sent to you. All right? It's this beautiful thing called revenue. Everybody thinks revenue equals profits. Revenue is just another financial accounting term that you should probably become familiar with in short order. In conclusion, this paper is highly condensed out of the necessity explanation of what you can do and who you really are. If you are operating with this described procedure, you are in complete conformance to the letter and intent of the law. The system may choose to attempt to intimidate you into not laying claim to what is rightfully yours. Do you understand it well enough to be the belligerent claimant? Remember, there's a federal Supreme Court case that says only a belligerent can stand upon his rights. A belligerent doesn't mean that you necessarily have to be violent or hostile, but it does mean that you have to do your due diligence. You don't have to be violent. You have to be vigilant. You don't have to be violent. All right? Saying the system does not want you to assert yourself. They will try to intimidate you into silence and acquiescence of the docile economic slave you currently are. All it takes for evil to prevail is good men to do nothing. To quote Teddy Roosevelt, one of the greatest shortcomings in contemporary society is the ability of many to distinguish between right and wrong and good and evil, as well as the lack of the spirit to fight against injustice. Fundamentally, peace and our humanity must be backed by the spirit to challenge what is wrong. A peace that acquiesces to rampant inequity represents the bleak stillness of a spiritual graveyard. Shutting one's eyes to injustice is not tolerance. It is little more than cowardice and apathy. It is to those who agree with this paper is dedicated and addressed to. It was not made clear in the previous discussion how and why this procedure affects the release of the individual from jail. The corpus body is being warehoused by prison system as surety collateral for the commercial instruments by the pretend courts discussed earlier. The Criminal RICO, Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, and Enterprise uses your exemption to provide the commercial energy to give it value. When these commercial instruments, eligible issues, are taxed back to source by the sovereign, who in fact is the ultimate source, the accused has now successfully closed escrow on the Treasury Direct, your Social Security number. So no surety can now be maintained on the instrument also. Since the escrow is closed, the means of stealing from one's exemption is closed off. One needs an open escrow to scam the account. Therefore, they can no longer pay for any of your warehousing, and if they cannot produce the funds, someone in the system will have to become the scapegoat and go to prison, effectively replacing you. All right? You're going to close the escrow. You're going to take care of them taxes. You're going to make sure that when the trust, because it's a trust, what happens, ladies and gentlemen, what I've been preaching about for years and years and years now, when the beneficiary and the grantor are one and the same, all right? or when the trustee and the beneficiary are vested in the same person, what happens to the trust? The trust collapses. And then what happens to the assets of the trust? Well, the trustee and beneficiary are in the same person. The beneficiary becomes the grantee absolute. And the property within the trust that is collapsed has to be accounted for and given to the grantee absolute, the creditor. All right? They created a constructive trust. They're holding shit in escrow. They're negotiating securities on the international stock market that would blow your fucking mind. And you were the source of it all. And if they commingled funds in the process of doing it, public and private, you're entitled to it all. You have to make a claim. How do you make the claim? By volunteering to take care of the fucking taxes. They're the debtor, you're the creditor. They already have the credit to take care of the taxes, but because nobody's reporting this shit to the IRS, they're whisking away your securities. They're casting you into jail for not paying your taxes. Taxes are not paid how you think. It's not a matter of Federal Reserve notes. That is not how you pay taxes. Also, as some have correctly guessed, this method can be used to eliminate mortgages, car loans, and credit card balances, since all these contracts are all totally fraudulent. The so-called lender never lent you any money. They have nothing at risk. They simply stole the funds from the alleged loan from your exemption. They trick you into paying back what they never lent you. This is the ultimate scam indeed. This subject is, however, beyond the scope of this document. There is one single overlooked idea in the commercial activity we are involved in and engaged in, and too many thoughts may overshadow the answer. Whatever venture we are engaged with, we will be unable to make settlement because there is no closure on the issue. The reason is there is no return to the source. That return cannot be made by dollars because dollars are measured in whole numbers. The return to the source cannot be made in Federal Reserve notes, United States dollars, okay? It cannot be made that way. So get that shit out of your head, because that's not how you get access to your exemption and to your estate. You're not using dollars. You're not using Federal Reserve notes, because it cannot be returned that way. Because the dollars are measured in whole numbers. A return to source must be made electronically, so therefore the units of measure must be in the source, must be made electronically. So therefore the units of the measure must be international units of revenue. International units of revenue, not dollars. Revenue. We're revenuing the revenue. You should not attempt to purchase something that is in the wrong venue. You need to be in the revenue, the revenue, and since we identify the international unit as revenue, that is what must be used to pay a bill. The only way we have found to obtain revenue to do this is to have your tax preparer file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID. Now, not you fill it out. Anybody that's out there telling you to fill out a 1099 OID is taking you down the wrong course. They're not licensed by the licensor as a licensee, and they're not insured. Take it to a filer. H&R Block maybe. J&H tax form preparation. Okay? And have them do it. They're insured if they make a mistake. They don't go to jail for making a mistake. Okay? And they're licensed by the licensor as a licensee to do it. And they're going to do it for you. take all the hard work out of it. I've always said, you don't have to do any of that shit. There are people and servants in place that are already happy to help you and are compensated very handsomely to do it. It's just a matter of knowing what the fuck to tell them. And yes, although a big Ponzi scheme, as you start to become learned, you will really start to like this system. I guarantee you will. Because it is all taken care of. And so you can resent it and go, I'm not going to learn it. I'm not going to focus on this. Or you can get a little closer to God and what he granted to us, which is the land of milk and honey on this earth, which is why he gave his only begotten son. And if you don't think this is biblical, just stop watching this right now, because I ain't got nothing to teach you and I ain't got nothing to fucking show you. I promise you that. If you don't think this is biblical, if you don't think this is spiritual, you're wasting your time on here. Just turn this shit off and walk the fuck away, because you're the type of individual that will end up in jail. Don't even try this if you're not connected spiritually and understand how this diabolical system actually works. You need to be in the revenue. And since we identify the international unit as revenue, that is what we must be used to pay the bill. That is what we must use to pay the bills. We identify, the only way we have found to obtain revenue to do this is to have your tax preparer file the federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue and ask him to give you an advance on the tax refund. Okay? It's an advance on the tax refund. The tax refund comes from the source, as that is where the 1099 report return to source. You must report to the source. You must remember that the revenue travels in electronic circuits in return to the source. Dollars are not eligible units to travel electronically, as they are measured in whole numbers. Dollars go wire transfer, which originates with a debt instrument. Okay? It's oriented with a debt instrument. So dollars cannot be transferred electronically. So dollars are never sent through an electronic fund transfer. Okay? Dollars are never, ever transferred through an EFT, which stands for electronic fund transfer. However, dollars can be wired. All right? Dollars carry liability, and the people holding them carry that liability to make sure the taxes are paid for carrying that debt and using that debt. Maybe I can simplify my comments by saying you might take your bills to, say, H&R Block and ask them to file the federal tax form 1099 OID on your issue and give you the advance on the tax refund. H&R Block will get the tax refund based on the discount to maturity. Thus, your advance will come in tax-paid dollars. A closed escrow no longer open to the public. It is these open escrows where criminal charges are taken from the assumed when escrow closes. With the voluntary 1099 tax report, there is no longer anywhere for agent provocateurs to assume charges from. All the actions against us come from open escrows. So after filing federal tax form 1099 OID on the issue, the tax is returned to the source and escrow closes. I don't believe that a case can be maintained against one if the 1099 is filed and the escrow is closed, because that tax is now paid. There is no debt. So the escrow is still open, and that is where the assumed charges come from. The guilty, not guilty issue is applicable, but only in tax deferral, as that is where they assume their charges are from. Open escrow, but when we get the tax preparer to file the 1099 OID on the particular issue in question, the dollar becomes revenue. The dollar becomes revenue, a tax, by the voluntary confession and return to source. Treasury Direct, your Social Security number, okay? The source is a mutual fund held by the county attorney, and that mutual fund was purchased with a blocked grant that used your foreign credit blocked therein to enable someone, agent provocateur, to assume the use of these funds in a true bill against you. Adolf Hitler had a conversation with his fiance's finance minister, in which he said things that will make clear where contrary claims come from. This was discovered in the book, The 20th Century Journey, by William Scherer, where he tells of Hitler's question to the finance minister. He said, "We have made the political decision to build up our military in violation of the treaties. So, how are we going to finance the buildup?" The finance minister said, "First, you will need to use the printing presses. And second, we have confiscated enormous amounts of the Jewish property. And third, we will block the foreign credit that will enable you to use the credit of your political enemies to build up your army." So what you see there is the formula for a block grant as the means to derive foreign private credit from the rolls of residents of municipalities in the county that is run by the county attorney and the one who prosecutes you on charges therefrom. These block grants are the credit used by the county attorney to purchase mutual funds that are the source of revenue used to finance the product of those who bring bills against you. These mutual funds are the derivatives used to finance the IMF and are the source the 1099 instructions refer to. So when we get a bill from a merchant or vendor, that bill was financed by the source that is measured in international units, revenue that can travel in electronic circuits, electronic fund transfer, in return, tax return to the source. Whereas dollars measured in whole numbers cannot pass through the electronic circuit, electronic fund transfer, here is where the bill must be reported voluntarily on federal tax form 1099 OID to identify those dollars as tax revenue and thus eligible to pass to the source for settlement and closing in exchange, Treasury Direct, Social Security number. Another way to identify the source, mutual fund, is the source is exempt from state and municipal taxes, but not federal. That the reason to file federal tax form 1099 OID on the particular issue is to tax the sum of the bill back to the source. H&R Block can do that as you take your bills to them and have them report on the said 1099 OID, and you can get an advance on the tax refund immediately. They advertise on TV how fast and easy you can get an advance on your tax return. Everyone assumes a tax return is a 1040, but there are lots of tax reporting forms, and the 1099s are some of them. Only they are voluntary reporting. They are not mandatory like the others, but nevertheless, the reporting identifies the source as a small claim, expressed in international units and eligible for a judgment to enforce tax recovery in small claims court. That judgment can be extended to, say, an quiet title and ejectment action would only apply after the said 1099 OID, I skipped a line. That judgment can be extended to, say, an order for release of prisoner held as collateral. Thus, this becomes a habeas corpus. The quiet title and ejectment action would only apply after the said 1099 OID return is made as it is after getting the escrow closed by the tax return to the source that one has actual settlement in fact. I don't think the mirror image is going to have much effect with the business because the mirror is relating to things and accounts of whole items measured in whole numbers, and we are talking about charges that can pass through electronic circuits as a matter of fact, so it looks like this reduces the idea down to a very small unit of a single source, thus one world order. With that idea in mind, we don't look at a credit as opposed to a debt or to a debit like in a mirror image, but the two are one and the same, thus one world order. I think the accrual accounting method will bear this out. It is the national currency that is not eligible to pay these debts because the international units I am referring to are derivatives leveraged 1,000 times or 1 million times the number we need not be concerned with. We only need to be concerned with the bill we have for ourselves to make settlement on. That is done by taking our bills and includes indictments to the H&R Block tax preparer and request he file the 1099 OID on the issue for return, a tax return, to the source, the mutual fund, for settlement and closing and exchange Treasury Direct. Then, after filing the said 1099 OID, ask for your advance on the tax refund. You will be paid the discount to maturity, and H&R Block will get your tax refund to balance their books. Something else should be said here about national currency. These are issues from our national Federal Reserve and are not international currency. The international currency, IMF, derives from municipal reserves, mutual funds that are obtained by the county attorney, like I mentioned earlier, and are a small claim by virtue of the international unit of measure used to account the sum of a bill. Thus, a small claim court is an international court. When admitting to be a debtor in possession is to admit to a tax liability because the debt has not been paid. One must request the 1099 OID be filed on the issue to settle the tax liability. There must be a return to source for settlement and closing. So it is in the National Reserve that created national currency. It is municipal reserves that create international currency, IMF. These each have a different value and different character to their nature. Thus, the national currency dollars cannot pass through electronic fund transfer circuits like international units of revenue does. It's like speaking a foreign language one to another. The central idea is in the federal tax form 1099 OID that I have written about. But now, to advance into action for the remedy, we here have discovered that the small claims court has two main reasons one can file for an action. First is the $3,000 limit that we cannot use because it does not provide enough relief dollars to settle the controversy. So the second jurisdiction it provides for one to sue for tax recovery. Now, we are getting somewhere. This small claim action enables us to obtain enforcement of the federal tax form 1099 OID issue. Because that filing is voluntary and it defines the small claim issue, because that filing is because that filing is voluntary and it defines the small claim issue as a tax requested to return to source, so that is eligible in the small claim court to sue for tax recovery defined in the federal tax form 1099 OID request to file and return the issue to source. Now, when the request for the federal tax form 1099 OID is refused, dishonored, you can file the small claim on small claim court, with dishonored contract being a contempt of court, whereby you send the sheriff to purge the contempt by obtaining their check for the amount of the tax recovery sought, and release your possession of all the property in controversy, or arrest and take the offender into custody and held until he pays. Now, here's where everyone fails in their thinking, because how does one queue for, say, 200,000 in small claim, how does one sue, how does one sue for, say, 200,000 in small claim when the dollar amount appears to exceed the $3,000 small claim court limit? Here's why. The US dollar amount is the venue and is a delinquent tax issue in a deferred debt somewhere. So, what you are pursuing is a tax recovery that is expressed in international units of revenue, thus a new venue, a separate and distinct jurisdiction in the small claims court. Awesome, huh? Thus a new venue or revenue. Accrual accounting brings it back to zero, balancing the books. The reason this is because the tax recovery revenue is in negative numbers, less than one whole number, and qualifies as a small claim, whereas the claim in dollars are assumed to be in whole numbers. Therefore, you can see the difference between delinquent tax dollars and delinquent tax recovery revenue. The revenue is the small claim exempt, and the dollars are delinquent tax deferrals in debt instruments held by someone, probably by the county attorney. Statutes at large, not a small claim. Once the issue is returned to source, that amount is eligible to be paid in dollars, tax paid dollars, prepaid. So the property and the dollars must be released to you as a matter of public policy, and it contains the real amount of damages one would otherwise have sustained and expressed in dollars. So, with that in mind, I think it is a good idea to name the county attorney along with the SBA or bank or banks or whoever had an active role in taking the property in question. Probably those who are paying the delinquent dollars and alleged taxes that are not yet returned to source. Thus, they are delinquent taxes eligible for tax recovery actions as a small claim as said above. So I hope you can see the full scope of the action to take for your remedy. When you fully absorb the meaning of all of this, you should begin to realize why there is no remedy in any court most of us have observed these last years. The basic reason is because everyone has expressed their claims in whole dollars, whether dealing with government, corporations, or agencies, and since those are all offerings of revenue, they are dealing in international units of revenue, not dollars. We have simply not been speaking the same language, and everyone goes down in defeat as a result. Also, a basic flaw with everyone is that the claim must be confessed, volunteered, 1099 OID, and not protested. Because the protest causes a barrier to the tax recovery as a dishonor, and our accuser uses the dishonor as their revenue in a tax deferral until we are able to obtain the small claim judgment to compel them to return a tax return, the issue to the source. Then too, you will not want to refer to your small claim in any plural reference. The small claims court, using the plural reference, is the public claim of the collective and multiple claims of dollars that need a broker to break them apart for you, and there are no private individuals identified, as the filing of 1099 OID is not mandatory. Thus, it is an individual single private claim. So, that claim is singular, a small claim. Even though there may be numerous public entries into the account, so keep your reference to your claim a small claim. In small claims court, it is thus an identifiable tax charge when the request for federal tax form 1099 OID is requested on the issue to return to the source. Thus, we have a voluntary tax to report, income tax, etc. The voluntary request for the tax report marks the item as a private account exempt from lien or levy. Income tax is voluntary and not mandatory. It is drawn in by magnetic energy charge, thus a withdrawal being the method of taking into account attraction. In a letter I had sent, I had made a request for the federal tax form 1099 OID that went to the county attorney, E.T. All, and it includes a request to return release all of my property subsequent to this issue. That includes my body. That is the acceptance and return of their offer of the bond amount that was set on me in court. So, his dishonor of that request is the cause for my small claim for tax recovery in small claims court. The dishonor is a treasury bill in this respect, eligible for commodity market exchange. So we can see in all of this that the source of issue is the taxpayer and the tax recovery, or tax return and the tax collector. Or a tax return is the tax collector. So, we or our straw man are both payer and collector, but we have this accomplished by our employees, IRS, corporate agencies, etc. This is why we request of them to file federal tax form 1099 OID to identify the issue as a delinquent tax that we can sue for tax recovery and subsequent release and return of property. With that, I think you have enough information to start an action for recovery of your property and the revenue to operate it. Maybe we are looking at a new frontier and new settlements on that frontier. It can be seen from the chart that gold increases from the grantor to the Federal Reserve. This is showing the use of derivatives to enlarge the super fund, but for the bill to return to the Federal Reserve via the U.S. agent, the federal tax form 1099 OID is needed to identify the currency as revenue and not tax delinquent dollars. This simply means the issue identified by the 1099 OID must return to the source before the resulting property can be returned or released to the owner because whoever is the agent who received the return to the source must pay the amount to the owner at owner's request to balance his books. So, it is the issue returning to source that brings the charge to neutral, zero, whereby the amount paid out to the owner is tax-paid dollars, prepaid, and debts are gone from the account. The exemption is merely the tax charge going to zero. in the agent's trust account after returning to the owner the tax-paid dollars. The agent doesn't get the exemption until actually paying the owner, although he probably assumes he has it. So this is the reason Federal Tax Form 1099 OID should be volunteered to displace the assumptions with a fact. Okay. The request for your agent to file Federal Tax Form 1099 OID on the particular issue identifies the agent as a tax protester if he fails to do as you ask. Ye have not, because ye ask not. Okay? It's getting a little late. I'm getting a little wore out and tired, guys. And there's some typos throughout this that make it really, really hard to read. I'm piecemealing it together. Anyway, I think I pretty much laid out the gist for you here. They're your agents and agency. They're negotiating instruments, securities, bonds, using your line of credit behind your back. And they're getting away with it because people aren't taking the time to read about the system and what it is. The land of milk and honey does exist. You can put these trustees in their place and you can get them to perform. And understanding the tax code. Everybody goes, Derek, why do you read codes? Why do you read all that shit? You say so often that it's not important. It isn't. It's important to understand what they're bound by so you can enforce it. After all, you are the enforcer of the law, are you not? You see something that's a wrong afoot, do you have an obligation to correct it? Yes, you do. Especially if it's a moral obligation. You see somebody trying to abduct a boy or a girl from the side of the road, you have an obligation to put your foot up somebody's ass. The question is, when the call arises, will you stand up and do it? This is not an easy fight, ladies and gentlemen. It's really not even a fight. It's about conviction. Are you going to stand with conviction and understanding the knowledge and technology that is being shown to you here? Do you have the cojones it takes to ask a simple fucking question? Go ahead and prepare that 1099 OID. And Frank, give me a fucking call when it's done. How about that? How about them apples? Oh, you don't want to do it? Frank, that's exactly what the 13909 is for, the 4506A, and the 211 form. So I appreciate your non-compliance. I'm sure the IRS will be more than happy to hear that you're unwilling as an agent and agency who absolutely is bound by the IRC because your bar association entered into contract with the Internal Revenue Service. So I'm sure they will just be absolutely fucking elated to hear that you're unwilling to fill out the 1099 OID and do a full accounting, dickhead. See how that works? I have grounds to come into the small claims court and make my claim for their failed performance, their breach of trust, okay? And when you're doing this, you're actually helping the Treasury. You're actually bringing down the national debt. The problem is with the whole numbers we have had in the dollars that the House Joint Resolution 192 chart shows as expansions of gold increase, but the increase that occurs or seems to occur because of so many more dollars to represent a particular property item, even though there are more dollars representing the value of a particular property, the property is still the same and has not increased like the dollars seem to have increased. So the problem is to realize that there are two different values put on a dollar. As one is a US dollar expressed in whole number, and the other is revenue expressed in international units of revenue, leveraged by brokers and attorneys by derivatives attaching a municipal tax account and increasing the debt by 3 zeros, adding 3 zeros to multiply the revenue into international units of revenue. Thus, there is an illusion of inflation and expansion of the property value, when in actuality, what happens is the account goes inverse and the numbers, being negative, go forever small. Thus, the small claim is a small claim court. It seems we must go from our old values of whole dollars into the new values of revenue. As the increased numbers identify the property that was represented by lesser dollars of earlier or prior issue, thus priority. So here we find the reason for voluntary reporting of a tax to charge a return to source. Thus, the tax is charged to close the circuit where there was no charge before. Because it was assumed and thereby no charge, it was trumped up to accuse the victim with an assumed probable cause that that forces the accused victim to voluntarily accept, charge a tax return as a matter of fact to displace the assumed charges, which is no charge that continues as a tax deferred debt until a tax charge in fact returns the issue to the source. Thus, the reason to ask for federal tax form 1099 OID be filed on the issue. The request identifies the particular issue as a delinquent tax, which changes to whole numbers of value to international units of revenue, which the prior dollar have been multiplied by 1,000. As a mill levy to increase revenues in the international community. It is a voluntary request for the federal tax form 1099 OID that identifies the energy charged in the property to enable an identification of private property to be made. Without that request, voluntarily, the particular issue in question is assumed to be public property and the prior debt continues on in a tax deferral of some sort, gathering interest, increasing the national domestic debt. So the biggest problem I see is that people have all these theories found in research of the statutes, but they fail to grasp what happens to the dollar when its value changes 1,000 times itself. One must volunteer the tax information so the issue, the body, does not fall into execution of law. Executions are unlawful as the tax 1099 OID is not mandatory, so they must be voluntary to enable the taxed issue to return to the source and settle and close, and closing in exchange can occur. This cannot occur by an execution, public law, but by agreement. Because the Redeemer does not live in false claims, if we agree and accept the probable cause alleged and request federal tax form 1099 OID to tax the issue back to the source, there is no longer a false claim, and the debt can be redeemed by the tax charging the circuit escrow to close in settlement. Let's say a debt from a mortgage is the issue. The mortgage, $1,000. Mortgage is sold to new owner who multiplies it by 1,000. Now we have a $1 million mortgage, okay? So it multiplies to 1,000 times triple odd equals 1 million. The 1 million is the new value of the body property, which for which community service obtains grants, blocked grants in lieu of the taxes. They can no longer pass bonding issues in the local community. The people vote them down. The funds are raised by assuming tax revenue from the victims municipal tax liability, from which they obtain cash advances by bidding and holding mutual funds that provide liquid funds for public uses, deferrals, while binding, while the victim's account in the municipality has been charged as collateral on the advance, a tax liability. Blocked grants are funded with foreign credit, which enables the agents provocateurs to use the credit of their political enemies to carry out their sinister purposes. Okay? Are we not foreign to the public, being private? Then whose credit has gone into the blocked grants? Are these from H&R Block? H&R Block stock trading in the market? So unless there is a voluntary request for reporting the said tax, there is no fact to identify property free of tax liability. So no matter what sort of rationalizing one does to use administrative and court procedures to set off or set aside or otherwise discharge the debt obligation, to dispose of the debt, one cannot get rid of the debt because the public has no mandatory powers to redeem debt issues, but only use deferrals that declare the debt paid but is only deferred into the hands of someone who agrees to hold the debt, and whatever type the interest-bearing debt is placed. So, the one option to all of this is to volunteer a request to file federal tax form 1099 OID to charge the tax on the issue for its return to the source. Now, there is a fact to take the charge issue. Okay, got it. Now there is a fact to take the charged issue into account and dispose of the debt by the balance going to zero. Now, some of the administrative procedures might work because the dollars have been taken from the old venue, US dollars, and reissued in the new revenue or revenue as in international units, a small claim, eligible to file for tax recovery in small claim court. So, one can see the old venue dollar do not have the same relative value to particular property that the revenue has. As the county has taken all their tax accounts and sold or traded them for revenue measured in international units that are mutual funds valued in this assessment multiplied by 1,000, these dollars of revenue are now a small claim, because they are voluntarily identified in the request for federal tax form 1099 OID to tax the particular issue back to the source, and are eligible in small claims court to sue for tax recovery and obtain a judgment to enforce the return to source. I can't stress this enough, that it takes the individual effort to request federal tax form 1099 OID to be filed on the issue to make it a small claim. Any other effect leaves the dollars in the account delinquent because they do not have the means to become a small claim until the principal accused requests the tax be reported and taken into the new venue called revenue. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court. After this occurs, then the dollars can be sought in small claims court in a tax recovery action. But without the request for the tax report 1099 OID, the dollars are delinquent and contraband because they have not been identified as tax revenue and they are not eligible as a small claim to enforce recovery. They must go to the source, dollar for dollar, to fulfill House Joint Resolution 192, Public Law 7310, 1248, Stat 48, as a matter of public policy. And when that happens, the property expressed by that debt becomes free of debt. The foregoing explanation might not be perfect in its identification of the subject relative matters, but it should improve your outlook on the problem. When we come back, we'll get back to more thoughts on the 1099 OID.